Okay, I went to check the door. I'm not sure whether Gina mentioned that this series of talks are based on a series of talks that were given 40 years ago by my teacher Sangharakshita on a series of talks called Buddhism for Today and Tomorrow. And he gave those talks about, I think it was 9 years after he founded a new Buddhist tradition here in England. So he's an Englishman who went to India, became a monk, practiced for about 20 years in India under various really remarkable Buddhist teachers from all sorts of traditions, Buddhist traditions that is. And then in the late 60s he came back to England and founded a new tradition with the vision of making the Buddhist teachings available to everyone living in the West, particularly in England, in a way that was relevant and that was actually applicable to our lives, to our modern lives, without having to kind of go to the East and become monks or nuns. And he was very clear that actually everyone, Buddhism is suitable for human beings rather than people in the East. So today I'm going to be exploring his second talk. His first talk, and was the talk I gave a month ago in this very place, was based on his first talk on that series of talks. And we talked about how life's nature is to grow and to develop. And you see it in all sorts of levels, from plants, just you can see it very vividly now. Just kind of all those blossoms kind of breaking out from the buds, and the grass just sort of growing more, and you can just see life growing, and that's life's law, if you like, or nature, to grow and develop. And we are human beings, we are living creatures, and it's in our hearts, in our minds, to want to grow and develop. But human development is not it needs to be a conscious development, it needs to be a conscious evolution. So Sangharakshita talked about the evolution throughout many years of the universe, and then the species, and kind of all this wonderful and marvelous evolution. And then here we are, human beings, with this amazing capacity to think and to be self-conscious. And he says evolution can carry on, can actually continue. So we tend to think of human beings as the last kind of, as being on top of evolution. But if we look at our experience, there's something in us wanting to break through. There's something that still wants to grow. I don't know if this makes any sense, but that was very vivid for me, especially as a child. I had this sense that there was an incredible potential within me that just needed the right conditions to bloom, like a bit like cherry blossoms or flowers, just waiting for the right conditions, and then they open. So I was talking about that last week, how life's nature is to grow. We, as human beings, we want to develop and grow. We want to find meaning. And from a Buddhist point of view, human evolution, from self-consciousness, it needs to be a conscious evolution. Nature is not gonna help us anymore. It needs to be, we are nature, and we want to grow, but it needs to be a conscious evolution, and we need a path. From a Buddhist point of view, that is, we can't just decide to grow and just do it. We actually need, because it's a conscious evolution, we need a training. So the Buddha managed to, in an incredible way, he managed to fulfill or actualize that potential of his heart and his mind to the fullest, and he achieved a state of complete kind of, he talked in terms of complete bliss and beauty. He saw saw beauty in a kind of in a way that was so deep that in a way the way we think of beauty usually, that is kind of in comparison maybe quite ugly. So the Buddha talked about this deep beauty that he saw in the universe and in living beings. So he had this great vision, and he had this experience of fulfilling, actualizing that potential. And tonight we're going to focus on what did he see, and how did he manage to communicate it? Because as soon as we are told he gained enlightenment, he became a Buddha, which means awake and free from all mental boundaries. It was an experience that is very, in some ways, quite different to our everyday experience of ourselves. Every now and again we have glimpses of a deeper beauty, glimpses of kind of drop into life in the depths of our minds. We kind of suddenly see things more clearly. For instance, we might realize that we're going to die really, really clearly. We really feel that everything is changing, and at some point, inevitably, when we're alive, we are gonna die, and we can feel that really strongly, and that can have the effect of like panic. Or it can have the effect of opening up the mind. When you suddenly see, I think that's the real beauty about spring or autumn, you see that change, everything is so vividly changing. You can't sort of deny the change that is going on around you. And it is so beautiful, but you can't get, and there's nothing you can hold of. There's nothing you can sort of, everything around you is changing. And then if you look at your experience, it's just the same. In your body sort of changing all the time, sensations around your hands and your skin and the muscles, everything is changing. And then feelings, all of the feelings you experience, they are constantly changing, and states of mind and emotions. And we tend to identify with kind of part of our experience, like sort of a narrow field of our experience. And so that kind of identifying with a narrow field of our experience is actually very painful. So when we get a glimpse of, there's more to myself than what I've been identifying with, there's this change, constant change, it's just really quite liberating. So the Buddha realized this change in such a way that was so deep that he just couldn't go back to identifying with anything, really. He went beyond all notions, all of our usual perceptions of life, time and space and beginnings and ends, and all of the kind of superficial mental states we get into. He just completely went beyond those. Being and not being, it's just like really quite mysterious. He went beyond the ways, the usual ways we perceive, beyond this sort of sense of separation. And all of these words I've just been saying, they're kind of, in a way, they're kind of metaphors to trying to explain his experience, the experience that somebody gains when they fully see the Dharma, the truth and reality in themselves and around the world. So as soon as he realized these deep and subtle truths of life, he had a problem, because when he realized how things really are, he was completely free. So he didn't have a problem in a way. He was completely free. he was in a way you can say that he is the happiest person in the world, even though he went even beyond happiness and unhappiness. And he knew that the truth that he saw would really benefit people. He saw that there was a kind of pain in the heart, a longing for freedom that every human being had. And what he saw was, in a way, that deliverance of the heart. But he thought people won't understand. Most people are too preoccupied with superficial stuff and worldly values and kind of too involved in superficial pleasures that actually it would be very difficult for them to see the subtle truth that I have realized. So he sort of felt inclined not to teach, but he couldn't help himself, because he saw one of the things that happened in his awakening was that in seeing things as they really are, compassion just unfolded as well. It was like an wisdom and compassion are the same kind of, in a way, the same thing, or different aspects of the different thing. So he couldn't help but he saw people were suffering a great deal, and he had this vision. There's this myth that the highest of gods appeared before him and said, please do teach the Dharma, teach the truth. People will be lost without it. Which I can't quite kind of work out what that myth is. In Buddhism you find lots of these kind of stories and myths that are not to be taken literally, but kind of they symbolize something. So I suspect the highest of gods might represent maybe our highest aspirations, or the highest aspirations of the world, saying, I am the highest aspiration in the world, and yet I don't satisfy the world. Please do teach this thing that you have seen that is much deeper, much higher than what I represent. That's kind of what I take it to be. And the Buddha had this vision of human beings as lotuses, and they at different stages of development. So some are deep under the water, deep under the mud. Some are just coming out from the surface, and then some of them are completely open and beautiful. And he saw that state of Buddhahood, a state being completely awake. He was like being a lotus that was completely open, untouched by the mud that was down there. And I've never seen lotuses myself, but I'm told that if you throw mud at them, it just sort of slips by. They're kind of unstained and very pure and very beautiful. So the Buddha took that to be, when you become a Buddha, when you realize your potential, you're kind of unstained by worldly values that cause lots of pain. They just sort of slip by. And it's interesting that in the night of his enlightenment, we are told there was one night. I believe it was longer than that. Kind of for all of that wisdom to unfold, I'm sure it took much longer than one night. But we are told that on the night of his enlightenment, he had all these horrible attacks from what's called Mara in the Buddhist tradition. Mara is like the evil one. All doubts and prejudices and all of the sort of dark sides that kind of they were attacking him, telling him, you're nothing. Who are you to kind of to realize this truth? Who are you to be free? And he was being attacked. You can say he was just his mind. He was being attacked, and he was just completely unperturbed by these attacks. So it was again like that kind of the world trying to say, actually, no, you can't. You have these aspirations, but who are you? Kind of thing. All these doubts that we get into, or you're better than. We can go into you're better than other people, or you're worse than other people, and just kind of we get these attacks on our minds. And for the Buddha, he was in a deeper state that those things just really didn't matter. He was just like, well, it's just not even a question whether I'm good or bad. It's just like that is completely irrelevant. So he awoke, and he saw beings in these different stages of development, and he saw that some of them had little dust in their eyes. He put it like that. He saw that some people were actually ready to hear the truth. They would understand, and and so he decided to teach. And he taught in various ways, actually. As I say, he was trying to communicate this very deep experience that he had. It was a bit like trying to explain the taste of an apple to somebody who's never eaten an apple. Like, how do you do that? And you haven't got an apple to give to them. Almost like if apples were extinguished the day you ate the last one. How do you explain what an apple looked like or tasted like? So the Buddha had this kind of problem. He tasted if I say an apple, that goes into Christian, the apple. Let's change metaphor. A melon. No. Anyway, your favorite fruit. He had the taste of freedom. And he had the task of communicating what that tasted like. So different. We are all very different, aren't we? And we have sort of different temperaments. And some of us like to think more. Some of us like to sort of feel more. We are more guided by our sort of gut feeling and intuitions and feelings. Some of us like to think a lot about stuff and everything that sort of makes sense. And he saw that different people had different temperaments. So he communicated in different ways with different people. He communicated through concepts and maybe sort of abstract thinking, trying to kind of get people to get a taste of that freedom he was sort of embodying already. And he communicated through symbols as well, and metaphors and images to appeal to those who kind of went more with their kind of gut feeling and perhaps emotions. He also communicating just by example, so by exemplifying his actions were apparently really powerful. Apparently his presence was really kind of strong, and some people just in seeing him, they could see something. They couldn't quite tell what it was, but there was such a presence in his being that communicated something. There was perhaps certain confidence, a certain kind of sense of richness and abundance that didn't come from him having lots of money or anything. He just had one piece of clothing and one bowl, and he begged his food. But there was this something in him. In some ways, he was the richest, most abundant man in the world. When you came across him, it was just like, wow. Suddenly all of your worries, all of your worries about success and fame and pleasure and pain and all of that suddenly seemed irrelevant, because he kind of was communicating something much deeper. He was saying, what you're worrying about now is actually nothing if you get to experience yourself in a much deeper way. And it wasn't like, you have to be me. He was like, you have to be deeply yourself. You have to go deeply into yourself to realize that you're much bigger than you think you are. That's what he's kind of, when people came across him, that was kind of his message. He communicated through silence as well. He didn't have to say anything, and that's kind of in a way an extension of just his presence. Apparently there's this story where he just held a flower. He would often walk around in the woods, and he just picked this flower and held it. And apparently that was one of his most kind of striking acts and teachings, and only one of the monks understood what he meant. He didn't have to say anything, and that monk gained enlightenment. In that moment, he was so receptive that he gained enlightenment. And Sangharakshita talks about how, well, that kind of communication is very difficult to get, because we are not as receptive. We are kind of too busy with our self-concerns and kind of, our minds are too noisy, and we're too busy talking, trying to kind of get our points, kind of really communicate what we think, and which is great. We need to communicate what we think, but also at times we just need to be very receptive and listen to what the world is trying to say and what other people are trying to say. And also it strikes me that a lot of the communication that we a lot of the communication that takes place amongst us is not so much verbal. Actually, I think I'm sure there are some studies on this, but I ignore. But I suspect there are some studies that show that actually
70% is non-verbal.
70% is non-verbal. There you go. Gina knows. Yeah, so we're communicating all the time. So anyway, back to the Buddha trying to express his vision and his experience. So through concepts, what did he see when he was sitting? When he gained enlightenment, he was sitting under a tree in the open air near a river. A beautiful, beautiful kind of sight. And one of the things he saw that I mentioned already, that are very important, so I'll mention again, is that everything is changed. Everything is, it's not that everything is changing, it's like everything is actually changed. It's not, Sangharajita says that it's not that things change, things are actually change. It's a constant kind of flow. We can believe that that kind of things that change, but they're not, according to the Buddhist vision. And when you deeply look into your experience, you realize they're not even things. It's just like a kind of flow. And then it's not even a flow, it's like something else. Which is very difficult to communicate. But the nearest you can get to it is by saying that everything is changed. There's nothing that remains the same in 2 given moments. Just now as you sit there, you'll notice all of your experience is constantly changing. And perhaps each action I do with my mind with my hands has an effect on your mind, and each word has an effect on your mind, and then the warmth or the cold has an effect on your body and your states of mind, and everything is constantly changing. And we can believe that, yeah, all of this is changing and the world is changing, but perhaps there's something like deep down that remains the same. And the Buddha said, actually, if you hold on to that view, that is painful in itself. He said, no, there's not even such thing as a soul, as an unchanging kind of core of your being. Everything is changing. And he saw this as a wonderful thing, because if everything changes, then there's this infinite possibility for growth, or for going downhill as well. But it's not just that things die, but because there is change, there are things arising as well. So there's passing away, and then people are born and people die, and flowers die and they are born. And so he saw that everything is changing, and he saw there's no such thing as being, as a fixed being. Also, he said there's no such thing as not being, because then that becomes a thing as well. And often in Buddhism you hear this kind of non-self doctrine, but then the non-self becomes like a thing. So it's not there is a self, but it doesn't mean that there is a no-self. Anyway, bit mind-blowing there if you think about it. So the first thing he saw, everything is constantly changing. Everything is a constant becoming, risings and passings away. But it's not random. It's not things don't arise just by chance or by accident. The other thing that he saw in the night of his enlightenment, sitting under that tree, he saw that there are certain patterns, certain kind of laws, if you like. So he saw that everything arises in dependence upon conditions. That's one of the most kind of profound things when you really think about it. There's not according to his vision. And again, you don't have to take his word for it or my word for it. You have to kind of go into your own experience. If you go into your own experience, and that's what the Buddha did, and really realize how things are, you see that there's no such thing as like the will of God. If you can't explain something, it must be the will of God. Or I don't know what other explanations there might be, but everything is kind of arises from a condition, like a flower in its soil and water and the sun shining, and then probably lots of other things I ignore, and then the soil itself is kind of compounded of lots of different things. So lots of conditions coming together to create what we call soil. And then the sun is compounded as well, and the water is compounded, and lots of kind of conditions need to come together to create water. And if one of those conditions is not there, then water wouldn't exist. Yeah? So that applies on the physical plane. We are born because our mom and dad did what they had to do, and then we have just the right temperature here on Earth. We eat, we breathe, and we have all sorts of conditions sustaining our life. And it's actually quite frail. We sort of take it for granted, but it's really precious and amazing that we are alive when you kind of think about it and when you have a look at your experience. So conditionality applies in the physical realm, and I think that's what all of the sort of sciences are kind of studying, and they're kind of studying the conditions. What are the conditions that lead for certain phenomena to arise? But the Buddha was more concerned with mental states, because he saw that the mind was really key for human evolution, for human development. Human development is the development of the minds, which in Buddhism is not just the rational mind and the brain, but it also includes the heart. In Buddhism, there's only one word for mind and heart. It's kind of, there are no two separate things. Chitta is the word meaning mind, heart. So human development is about developing the minds, the chitta. And he saw that conditionality applies to the mind as well. And so there are two orders of conditionality. One being cyclical. Is that a word? Cyclical? And another one being spiral. And Sangharakshita goes further and he says there are two modes of being, and most of the time we are caught up in the cyclic order of conditionality, which just goes round and round and round in the same old patterns of mind, which actually creates a lot of pain, and we just we react. So Sangharakshita calls that order of conditionality the reactive mind. We get shouted at and we shout back, or we just become paralyzed and don't do anything, and then later on get resentful or get really angry. So these are reaction. This is a kind of a habitual way of responding to the world and to ourselves. So we get lots of thoughts into our minds, and we can either get caught up by them and go round and round and round and round like a washing machine, or the Buddha is saying there is another way of responding, another order of conditionality. So in the cyclic order of conditionality, you just conditions just lead to, it's like a sort of play of opposites. So pleasure, you get pleasure and then pain. You look to be praised and you fear to be blamed. You're looking for fame, but you don't want to be, what's the opposite of fame? Infamy? It's a better word, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, pleasure and pain, fame, infamy, praised, blame, all of those things. Gain and loss, that's another one. Constantly caught up by those. And pain leads to, if you have a pain in your body, it might lead to you feeling a bit irritable and feeling a bit moody. And that leads to you being a bit grumpy. And then somebody sort of asks you something and you kind of react to them, and then that has a negative of, if I shouted to Gina, then Gina gets sad and then irritable, and then you see how that just is self-perpetuating, and it just goes around and round, and then Gina would shout to Gabriel, and then Gabriel will, then it'll be a horrible night. Anyway, you get the point. But we have another option. We have, oh, I need the clock actually, because, all right. That's the reactive mind. The creative mind, in the other hand, is the spiral kind order of conditionality, which doesn't is not self-perpetuating in this vicious cycle of pain, but it spirals up into wider, more open states. Yeah. So you could even say that the cyclic level also spirals down. It sort of spirals, but it spirals down. The other one spirals up. So with pain, you might get curiosity, for example. So what is this about? Or if Gina shouts at me, I can sort of step back and think, what is that about? What is Gina really wanting? Maybe she doesn't really want to shout at me, but she's sort of trying to get at. Maybe she's trying to get something. Maybe she's in pain, and shouting at me is a way of getting relief, or a clumsy way of saying, please listen to me, or have I done something to her? Not in a way that I'm sort of giving myself a hard time, but what is it? And a really good way of doing it is just by feeling it in your body. How does that feel in my body? And then often the body knows what's going on. If you try to work out in your mind, you get caught up into, oh, Gina is horrible. She's always shouting at me, blah 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 blah. Jeez. So, and then I'm caught up again. But I can be more creative. Instead of being reactive, I can be a little bit more creative and sort of try to empathize and try to get into dialogue with Gina. What is it, Gina? It may be that Gina is not in a great state, so she can't just go into what is it just yet. But maybe me not reacting straight away would help Gina not to get carried away into a more and more negative state. Maybe it will help her to Amalasiddhi is not responding to me shouting. She might get more frustrated as well, but at least I'm not getting caught up in that, and then I'll be able to approach Gina with a better state of mind, and there will be more fruits to our relationships, to our relationship. So the creative mind is active, is responsive. In the other hand, the reactive mind is passive. You just go along with emotions, with the habits that you have created for years and years and years, and what you've learned from your family and from society, and the kind of things that you just sucked in without really thinking about it. So you're just passive. The creative mind tries to make a difference, a real positive difference. And because it's creative, it's like being an artist. You bring into being something more beautiful. You use the raw material of your experience to use something more to create something more beautiful. And that might be in communication. That might be just in your own mind when you're getting into negative states of mind. That might be if you get lots of pain in your body, instead of reacting to it and making it worse, you can just become curious about it. How does this actually feel like? You may notice the richness of sensations. It just becomes like life becomes more alive. Yeah, you're participating with the creativity of the universe, and because the universe has been creating all these years, and here we are. We've been created by the universe by all these conditions. So that's roughly what the Buddha saw. He saw that there's these levels of conditionality, one being cyclic, one being spiral, and everything changing, everything arising in dependence upon conditions, and enlightenment itself arises in dependence upon us working with our minds creatively. And human development is about learning to live more creatively and not seeing when we are our reactive tendencies. And it's a lifetime process, and friendship has been such a good thing for me, because meditation, in the one hand, allows me to see myself more fully, gives me a wider perspective, but friendship is a more kind of direct way, like Gina was talking about, me mentioning things to her, and she mentions things to me. So it's not just me, sort of. And that living with other people who are trying to develop is really helpful. Working with other people who are trying to develop, getting together with people who are trying to develop is just really helpful. The Buddha also used, we have been talking about concepts, but I said the Buddha used images as well. And here we have an image that represents or tries to depict the cyclic order of conditionality. So the Buddha saw that at the heart of our reactions and our kind of habitual tendencies, there's a pig, there's a cock, and there is a snake. Yeah. So if you look at your experience, then you find those three. And actually they represent greed, hatred, and delusion. He saw that at the bottom of all of our selfishness and our pain, greed, hatred, and delusion are the roots. He saw the roots that causes pain. And that's what they represent, greed, hatred, and delusion. I'll try not to explain it too much because I want it to remain as a symbol, but it needs a little bit of introduction. Then in the second circle you got beings falling down and then beings ascending up. Yeah? And that is, in a way, that is inevitable. There's always gain and loss, like I was talking about. Pain and gain, and pain and... what's the other one? Pleasure, that's the one. There you go. And then in this other circle over here, we got various realms of existence. For now, let's take them as states of mind that we can get into every day or throughout our lives. So right at the bottom, we have hell. These hellish states of mind that are just deeply painful. And you can't, it feels like burning, or it feels like being in a really, really cold place, surrounded by ice, without any clothes. You're completely naked with this pain. And it seems like you can't do anything about it. You get into, it's like the bottom of your states of mind, where nothing sort of helps, where it's just sort of darkness and pain. That is the kind of state of mind that we can get into. Then we have the hungry ghost. They are so hungry. They are funny beings. They have big bellies, really, really massive bellies, but they're always hungry. And they have tiny mouths, and they're always hungry. But whatever foods they find, it becomes poo or rubbish. So this is this kind of neurotic desires that we may have, that we are never quite satisfied, and whatever we take, it doesn't really satisfy. It's not kind of constantly wanting things, but it doesn't quite make it. We are so full of things that actually don't satisfy the heart. Then on this side we have the animal realm, and they are fairly happy. They just kind of go about their business of trying to find food and having sex, and what's the other thing they do? Sleep. Those are the main things. Just meeting the basic needs. And we can get into that as well. I just want to sleep and then eat and maybe have sex, and that's all I care about. And just life becomes a bit strange. Then on this side we have the Asuras, or they'll be like warriors. They're really jealous. They're always fighting, always kind of in a constant state of anger and jealousy, and they're jealous of the gods up here. the gods live for a long time, and they're made of lights. You can get into this state where it's quite blissful and you're quite happy. But even the God realm is not a secure place according to the Buddha, because it's also impermanent. It's held within the wheel of life. So they are enjoying the fruits of this tree, and then the Asuras are really jealous. That's why they want to fight them. Then we have the human realms, or the human realm, which is a bit more, is the most sort of balanced realm. It's not an extreme pain, it's not an extreme pleasure. It's more, it's kind of, we are doing more than just meeting our needs. We have a bit of jealousy and stuff that's also going on. So we sort of have bits of all of them, but we are also quite creative. So we have the arts, and we sort of create music, and when we get into quite positive states of mind and quite a fairly good perspective. And all of these states are impermanence. They don't escape impermanence. This chap here, he's the Lord of Death. So he's holding the wheel of life, and so all of these states are held within aging and death. He's holding it, and he won't let anybody escape. He will get you with his feet or with his hose. The outer circle out here is sort of 12 scenes. We don't have time to go into them, but there are some things that are given. For example, there is a boat with 4 people, and one of them is steering. That represents our human structure, our body and all of the senses. Name is often called name and nama rupa. Can't remember the translation into English, but is all of our senses is our kind of physical being. That's what it is, with awareness. That's awareness steering. And then we have the senses, and the mind is included in the senses, not just the 5 senses, the usual senses we think of, but the mind is also a sense. And the object, like images are the object of sights, thoughts, memories, etc. are the objects of the mind sense. Then we have contact there. So when we have senses, we have contact. This is 2 people embracing. And whenever we come in contact with something, there is a feeling. So that's what this represents. There's somebody with an arrow on his eye to really make the point that you feel things. And this is where it gets. This is the interesting bit about the wheel of life. There's feeling, there's contact, there's feeling, and then there's somebody offering a drink to this man. I was talking about how Gina shouts at me very often. This is not true, but I have ears, and because I have ears, and dependence upon my ears, I can hear Gina's words, and so that's feeling, and then I have a choice there. I can react with craving or sort of grasping the experience, or I can step back and be creative. By stepping back, I don't mean escaping it, but I mean getting involved in a more creative way. So there is a gap between feeling and craving, and when I decide to go along with the same old ways with craving, I recreate myself again and again into the same old Amalasiddhi. If I decide, if I am aware enough to create a gap, then there's an opportunity to leave the wheel. If I take the drink, if I take what's actually a poison, it looks like a drink, it looks like nice water, but it's actually poison. If I choose to act in the same way, that is taking the drink, then I grasp the fruits of my actions, which is the same old Amalasiddhi. Then this pregnant woman means becoming. Then I'm born again into the same old me. And then that leads to death. aging, pain, and all of the things that come with the old me. If I make the most of my awareness and mind the gap, then up here, there is what the Buddha taught. This being, that becomes. On the arising of this, that arises. This not being, that does not become. If this ceases, that ceases. That's conditionality. Yeah, seeing conditional, seeing things as they really are. So I can escape that by seeing that I have a choice. And then this figure here is pointing to the moon. It's pointing to a much bigger perspective. And this gap leads to the moon, which represents enlightenment. Well, I've given you quite a lot of inputs, and perhaps it is time for me to finish. But not just yet. Nearly. When we spiral up, there's another symbol that represents the enlightened mind. I won't say anything about that one, but that is a possibility. That represents qualities of the enlightened mind. So I've tried to give a vision of or a glimpse. I've tried to kind of give you a glimpse of what the Buddha saw and what's the vision of human existence, the vision of reality, a vision that is potential in you, and a vision that I've been given by my teacher Sangharakshita and by other friends, and a vision that allows me to grow and develop. And so I hope you got something out of this vision. I hope you got a glimpse of this vision. And Sangharakshita finished off his talk by saying that the Buddha's vision represents a challenge, that we find ourselves all the time with the decision whether to react or create. Those who take up the challenge of creating will make the nucleus of a new society, and in some ways we'll start changing the world. We'll start instead of letting the world just go round and round, the world can become, the more creative people there are, the world will become a more creative place and with less pain. That's enough from me. Thank you.